Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. I'm Chris. For this video, we're going to be going over the dynamic range king of yesteryear. And of course, by that I mean the Fujifilm FinePix S3 Pro. Now, I was actually going to get the S5 Pro, but those are getting kind of expensive and kind of rare. And I'm cheap, so I figure that both these cameras should have pretty similar functionality as their sensors are very close in their specs. The S5 though basically has minor tweaking done to the low pass filter to reduce moire, and I believe that they tweaked some stuff so the high ISO is a bit better. So I'm gonna guess that the images should come out fairly samey. So I don't think I'm missing much in the terms of image quality by getting the S3 over the S5. However, user experience, that's a different story. We'll get into that later.
The Fujifilm FinePix S3 Pro is a DSLR. It was announced in February of 2004. Its claim to fame is twofold. First, the Super CCD SR2 sensor. This was a sensor that used hexagonal pixel layouts, and in between the hexagonal photodiodes, it used secondary, smaller, lower sensitivity photodiodes. I'm going to be posting a illustration of this that I found online. I'll link to the original source below.
So the argument they had for the hexagonal photosites was that it would overall provide better resolving power, and that the smaller, lower sensitivity photosites would help produce an image that had extended dynamic range when combined with the bigger photosites. This, I'm going to call, is Fuji magic. Now, the second fame of claims for this DSLR is that it's the first DSLR ever to feature live view. It's a strange implementation, and yes, it is even stranger than that found on the Olympus E330 and 520 with the weird live A and B modes or whatever, but we'll get into that later. All in all, the camera features basically 12.34 megapixels worth of photosites, or photodiodes, which are made with combined into pairs, which produce 6.17 megapixels worth of photosites. Now, this can actually output a 12.34 megapixel interpolated image, and the sensor is itself an APS-C sized sensor, so 1.5 times crop. Now, the camera body is based off of the Nikon F80 or N80, depending on where you live. And that basically means it has a 5-point AF. Unfortunately, though, since it's not a flagship film body, it doesn't use the excellent 1005 pixel metering system thingy, but rather the cheaper 10-segment matrix metering system. It has an ISO range of 100 to 1600 and a flash sync of 1/180. Shooting speed in the standard dynamic range mode is apparently 2.5 FPS. Let's demonstrate. Oh, so speedy. However, if you use the Bigly dynamic range mode, you will be reduced to 1.2 FPS for 3 RAWs. Now, let's see, that actually did not sound like 3. Let's change the dynamic range mode to not so bigly, or I'll just shoot at a scene that shouldn't need it. Oh, I don't know, that sounds like, yeah, that does kind of sound like 2.5. But either way, not that many. Oh, fun fact, this camera has dual card slots. But don't get excited. One of these slots is the XD picture card, and the other one is a fairly standard compact flash. So kind of good to go. The rear features a 2-inch LCD, and it has 235 K dots. Now this thing is powered by AA batteries, 4 of them, and when loaded, this weighs 935 grams, almost 1 plana. Actually, you know what? We'll do the math. It's apparently 94% of a plana. So yeah, a little bit of mass, and it has poppy uppy flash. There we go. Shooting with the S3 overall feels pretty good in the hands. It's a bit round with the digital bits kind of extending at the back, but overall makes for a good deep gripping experience. The camera's build is plastic with the metal frame underneath, but it doesn't feel cheap. At least, you know, it's not as robust as a Nikon F5, but it ain't a Holga. So, you know, somewhere in between. Overall, fairly solid. Now, additionally, despite the near plana weight, it doesn't feel too heavy in the hands. The balance is fairly good, and the controls, since they're based off the F80, you know, they're to be expected, pretty good. It has 2 command dials, and it's not so like ridiculous that you don't have to do a lot of button presses to do things. Again, command dials and the dials on the top kind of help with that. You know, you got your TASM modes and your continuous shooting dials up here. Let's see if it'll focus. Oh, there we go. So yes, it is fairly intuitive, and even the digitally integrated bits work pretty well with the film body, and the 4-way D-pad is pretty good. All right, so you'll notice on this camera it's got a sub display over here on top of the color LCD, and it has 4 soft buttons as well. I really like these things. They let you change functions pretty quickly based on which screen you're looking at, and the screen itself presents reasonably good info. You got your ISO, battery level, and how many shots you got left. So yeah, weird little sub display, pretty great. I guess saves battery compared to using the color 2-inch display on the bottom. Alright, shooting the camera is a reasonably good experience, although the finder isn't the biggest, and that's since it's based off the N80 camera, and on top of that, the 1.5 sensor crop does come into play here. Now, AF performance is reasonably snappy and pretty accurate. As far as framing goes, if you're going to get the camera, I recommend using the center focusing point, as it's the only cross-type AF point, so it's the most accurate one. Now, metering isn't all that bad, especially when earlier on I said it's just a 10-segment metering and not the like fancy 1,000-pixel one on the F5, or you know, looking at more contemporary Nikon systems, the 10,000-pixel system. I didn't have a problem with the metering overall. Now, here's the thing though. The system itself, when you are shooting with the camera, you have to be aware that like when you shoot, you take a shot, the whole thing kind of locks up. Now, you can't really change settings apparently other than white balance, but I'm going to turn it around. Okay, so I realized in the clip I'm showing here, I basically cover up all the buttons after the shutter release. So we're going to just take a photo here, and I'll show you. All right, I have to change it to manual mode. Take a random photo, and while you're doing that, look at that. Things don't respond until that goes out. Oh, there you go. It did. So maybe it's not that bad, but things kind of lock up with the sub menu for a little while after the photo's done, until I guess most of the buffer is dumped. Although I did notice that earlier that you actually can change your white balance still, so that's kind of neat. But yeah, let's press it till it changes. Hey. If you do actually load the buffer up, like, you might as well leave the camera alone, put it down, go grab a coffee, turn on a YouTube video, like one of mine, and have a wait. Because it takes ages to clear the buffer. It seems like it's actually very much camera limited. I've got a card in here that should be able to write at like 20 megabytes per second, and like The RAWs are big, well, not gigantic, but it does seem like when you take pictures with this that it takes several seconds to clear even a single RAW at even like regular dynamic range. Now, when you're actually reviewing images on the camera though, or menu diving, the LCD is pretty serviceable. Those 235K dots, they're hard at work. I'll pull up a picture here, or actually, you know what? There. I know it's not going to be the most useful representation looking at me holding up the camera, but take my word for it, it's a reasonably good review screen. Now, the camera's ISO performance is pretty good from the 100 to 400 ISO zone, and things start to get dicey when you go up. Now, again, like with most things with modern software, it's actually pretty good at doing the noise reduction at the higher values, but it's all right. It's not a complete potato at like ISO 800 or 1600, but it's not the greatest, and you do kind of got to run it through some noise reduction algorithms from like modern software. Now, the other thing that kind of sucks about using the N80 body for the basis of the camera is that this thing cannot really meter, or like can't meter manual lenses. You can put them on, you can jam it in on the manual mode, on the exposure mode, and you'll be good to shoot. But it does come into play, especially if you are planning to use vintage lenses. I do remember that at one point I jammed on my 51.2, and I fiddled around for a while in aperture priority, and it just like it didn't take a shutter, it wouldn't do anything, it didn't meter, and then I remembered I got to move it to manual mode for it to release the shutter, because in aperture priority it won't do it. So just remember that if you are considering this, you want to use manual glass, manual mode only. Now, let's talk about the live view. Like I said earlier, it is a claim of fame point. It's the first DSLR to do it, and understandably, they didn't have a reference for how they should implement it. So, unless you count point and shoots from beforehand, but, for a DSLR, they didn't know what they're doing. So, I'll flip the camera around, and we'll have a look at diving into the live view in a second. All right, so let's demo that live view. As I said, it's a first generation live view system, so it's a little bit weird, and we got to do some menu diving to get to this. And look at that. When you start to enter, right before you do, it warns you got to use manual focus. All right, so as you can see, we have an image of Kirby there, and you may have noticed on the corner of the screen, you got a 30-second timer. You may have also noticed that this is a black and white only live view. So again, kind of weird. I'm guessing also that the 30-second timer is there to prevent the CCD from overheating. So overall, the live view system seems kind of finicky, but at least you get to zoom in at the center of the frame. So that's kind of nice. There you go. So 30 seconds up, and it just shuts itself down. So overall, live view is kind of a gimmick here. It's kind of weirdly implemented, and it's black and white. But like I said, you get to zoom in on the center of the frame. So I think there's some utility there if you actually want to use some manual focus lenses and focus check on tripod, because it is, many clicks to get into this live view system. So not entirely worthless, but like almost. So the battery situation is good and bad. Again, it takes regular AA batteries. But here in Canada land, in the wintry coldness, I noticed that the temperature really takes a toll on the batteries. Now, this is pretty true, especially for alkaline and those nickel metal hydride cells. They just don't tend to last very long. However, I actually switched to some fairly nifty lithium-ion batteries that were AA's and rechargeable, obviously. And they appear to actually last much longer and appear to not be nearly as bad in the cold. So, pro tips for any viewers who live in a place that has winter. Okay, so I know this video sounds entirely like it's just weird niggles about the camera. and why it's a bit of a pain in the ass to shoot. And that's because it is. The camera has a lot of really strange quirks and faults, but in spite of all of that, it's a good shooting experience. The shutter sound, the mirror slap, and all the jank kind of comes together to deliver images that aren't quite 12 megapixels, but definitely have pretty good dynamic range. And that makes for, a potential great looking photo. Oh, right, there's one last weird little niggle. This camera, it only works in half stops, so, no third stops, if you're into that. And unfortunately, I am. But otherwise, that's it. So, this camera isn't for everyone. That was true when this was new, and it still applies today. But if you want to get a feel for the camera of this type and the dynamic range that it could deliver, there's not that many other options. The slow clunkiness of the camera actually kind of makes it a reasonably solid walk around to do static shots with. And, the camera's files don't come out super baked, but there's a lot of potential in them for baking. An excellent cake can be had. And all this means is that when you do get a good shot with the S3, it feels really great, if that makes sense. Just don't buy this to do like action, unless you're like a real glutton for punishment and you're willing to wait like a minute for the buffer to dump. Dynamic range. Now this camera has actually got pretty good dynamic range, not just for a vintage camera, but for a camera of the modern era, kind of. There's a couple asterisks. Well, there's one asterisk here, and that is that not all software supports the Super CCD SR2 sensor layout. And sometimes it's not that clear which ones do and which ones don't. It seems that the big companies, your Lightrooms / your Adobes, your DxOs, they all open and retain the entire image structure, both your primary chunky sensor and your smaller one. However, the freer options either struggle with this or don't take into account the smaller pixel at all. I noticed this with the Raw Therapy and with Darktable. They open the file, but it definitely seems like they don't take into account the smaller subpixel designed to capture highlight detail. Or if they do, they kind of suck at it. So, there's that. Now, if you do plan on getting the camera but you don't have a suitable program, I would tell you, don't worry. Fujifilm actually still has you covered. The Raw File Converter EX 3.0, which is still available to download at the time of this recording, supports the Fujifilm FinePix S3, S5, and even the S2, although the S1 is not on that list for some reason. And it actually has some pretty reasonable editing power. So, there's that. And it's free. It's a bonus. So I'll link to that actually below in the description. And when you use the right software, you can really see the sensor's ability to recover highlight data. Now, in a minute, we'll turn to a voiceover and I'll show you some samples that have been scaled down to compare the S3's 6.1 megapixels. So we'll try to, level the playing field. I'll pick a camera of a similar era and a modern camera, either the A7 III or something else. For this test, we have some garlic scapes used as the subject with overexposed sky in the background. As you can see right off the bat, the S3 kind of has the advantage here. Skies are still blue. The 40D and A7 III look like their skies are blown. Once the exposures are set to -2 stops, the Fuji really shines with the clouds blowing up really nicely, and the 40D and A7 still looking like blown out skies. the Fujifilm S3 Pro. Do I recommend this? Well, here's the thing. The FinePix S series cameras nowadays seem to be kind of picking up in value. The S3 in particular seems to be going for around 125 to 250 USD, depending on condition, of course, and that's a little bit pricey. There are cameras of the era that offer a shooting experience that is a lot better than the S3. Again, if you don't care for the CCD. So if you actually don't, I would actually recommend the Nikon D200. It is going for typically between $75 and $150, and it offers kind of a more robust build quality to the camera and a lot of just nice improvements over what the S3 has to offer, like an overall better user experience, faster shooting experience, and you get a normal 10 megapixel CCD instead of the 6.14 megapixel super CCD. So, things to consider. That being said, I'm going to guess that if you're watching this video, you're probably here because you're into the super CCD. And if that is the case, I would also recommend considering trying to find a S5 Pro, the next camera up. If you can find it at the right price, it might be worth the while spending the extra money. It seems that on the low end, they're going for around $225, and on the high end, around $450 US. Now, I don't see them selling that often in the low end anymore. They do tend to be trending up for around 300 to 350 USD as a more common sale price. But again, if you hunt a bit and are patient, getting one of the S5s at the $225 mark, I think is a really good deal and a better option than the S3. But if you really are about stretching your dollar, the S3 is still probably a good way to go. It can be had on the low end for much less than the S5. You just got to consider the inconveniences that come with shooting the S3 over the S5. For example, the S5 allows you to meter with manual glass. The S5 build quality is the D200 essentially. So in that respect, you're getting a phenomenal camera body that is robust and seems to last forever. And I used to have an S5 a long time ago, and honestly, that camera, it's as if you took the best parts of the D200 and the best parts of the S3 Pro and you jammed that together. Mostly. You still got some funky Fuji bits going on, it's still kind of slow to clear the buffer, but not to the extent of the S3. At any rate, the long or the short is that I do recommend the S3 still. It offers a interesting shooting experience with that super CCD at a considerably lower cost than the S5. And again, if the super CCD is what you're after, the S3 will still offer up that capability, and it'll still be fun to use as long as you're aware of the weird niggles that it comes with. So, would you consider buying the S3 or a different Fuji camera or another camera altogether? Let me know down below. Otherwise, that's all I got. And until next time, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.